These are the deserts of southern Peru. They are some of the driest and most desolate places on the earth. Hi, I'm Josh Bernstein, and I've come here to solve one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, the Nazca lines of Peru.
For centuries, when people crossed these plains, they noticed lines in the sand. But they had no idea what they were seeing. Then, in the 1920s, came the first airplane flights. When pilots looked down from the skies, they were amazed. For the first time, they could see the lines were part of a massive complex of geometric figures called geoglyphs, covering the whole desert. Who made them, and why? The mystery of the Nazca lines was born. The Nazca Plain is the Death Valley of South America, baking hot and almost totally without rainfall. Sandwiched between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes Mountains, it was home to an enigmatic culture. The ancient Nazca people who lived here between the 4th and 9th centuries left no great cities. They lived along the fertile river valleys crossing the desert. On the plains between the river valleys, they built their monumental designs. The Nazca lines have become one of the world's most famous archaeological mysteries.
The best way to see the lines, really the only way, is from the air. And there's no shortage of conventional aircraft available for tours. But I'm looking for something a little bit more unconventional and exciting. Hi.
Eduardo Herrén probably knows the Nazca lines better than anybody else alive. He's been flying over them for 26 years.
Is it safe?
Oh, yes, it's safe.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know, I think I weigh more than this.
Oh, yes, but for the Nazca wings, it's good. Huh?
This is probably the best way to see the lines.
Oh, yes, for the lines, it's the best platform. It's a ULM, it's ultralight.
Some people believe the lines were built for extraterrestrials. Seeing them now, I understand why. Many of them do look like runways. And why would an ancient people make figures which can only be seen from the air?
I'm amazed at how spread out they are. And that they're really everywhere. Yeah.
Hundreds of lines crisscross the desert, some 10 miles long. A massive bird is the size of a football field. There's a monkey, a little harder to make out.
Right there. Yeah. Tail. It's great.
The spider is about 200 yards across. What looks like a whale swims across the desert, a plume of water erupting from its blowhole. On the side of a hill, I see a huge figure which looks human. Others are harder to identify. One in particular catches my eye.
What's that one there?
It looks like a flower. Eduardo tells me he has never seen it before.
Oh, look. Congratulations. It was number one. I did? Yeah, never. Really?
This is incredible. On my first flight over the lines, I've actually discovered a new Nazca figure.
Yeah.
There are thousands of figures. In fact, Eduardo has found 324 himself. Even so, it's an amazing stroke of luck to find one on my first flight. What do they mean? Why are there so many of them? Time to set off across the desert and search for some answers. There is one name that always comes up in relation to the Nazca lines: Maria Reike. This amazing German woman dedicated most of her long life to understanding the lines. For 60 years, until her death in 1998, she studied the Nazca Plains, walking over almost every part of them, often sleeping out at night, obsessed by the mystery of the lines. She was sure she had the answer. To find out about her theory, I'm going in search of Maria Reiche's foremost disciple, Anna Maria Cogorno. I'm hoping she can shed some light on Maria Reiche's much-debated theory.
Great. Are these lines?
Yeah, come and see.
The first thing I notice is how hard it is
come
to see
here.
the lines from the ground.
They look so much bigger in the sky. Wait, this is a Nazca line? This
Well,
looks so
this is
small.
the
From
edge
air,
of
they
it.
look like they were.
Yeah,
So
they
much
look
bigger.
like, yeah, but this is only the edge of it.
So you're saying this is an edge?
These are edges, these ones.
So wait a minute, Anna Maria. These are the Nazca lines.
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, I got it. Okay, so now I'm looking at this thinking this is a Nazca line. Wait, scoot a little bit this way.
Right, but if you come to the middle,
This is the Nazca line.
yes.
Okay. So how are these made?
Well, the only thing they had to do is just to push the pebbles and the stones to the side to make the designs of patterns, you know, just moving the pebbles and the stones.
I always thought that they brought the rocks here and that they had to build these shapes, but they didn't. They sort of cleared the lines.
Very simple but very logical way how to do it, no?
So this whole field was covered with these dark rocks.
Absolutely. Because there was this huge flood millions of years ago. So the yellowish clay is underneath and it was covered totally with volcanic stones containing iron and the little pebbles.
The ancient Nazca must have had an advanced knowledge of survey techniques. With primitive transits and marker ropes, they could lay out complex designs across the desert. Then they just had to move the top layer of stone to reveal the pattern. It's a clever and simple way to transform the landscape. Archaeologists have calculated that a small group of people could have made one of the large figures in fewer than 48 hours. The other thing that amazes me is how the lines have lasted for so long. It turns out that there are two good reasons for that. The sand here has a high level of gypsum in it, which gets dampened every night by dew, gluing the stones to the ground. Also, the stones absorb so much heat in the day, they create a cushion of warm air above them, protecting them from the wind. As a result, any mark made on the desert stays for centuries. Car tracks made in the 1920s are still there today. So I understand how they made the lines. Now I want to know why they made them. Anna Maria tells me this is a good place to discuss Maria Reiche's theory.
Yeah.
That's great.
Now I can see the trapezoid. So what does this mean?
Well, the purpose of all the lines, figures, were related to positions of the moon, the sun, the stars, solstice lines also.
So on the 21st of December, which is your summer
It's our
solstice,
solstice.
my winter solstice,
Right,
This line points to the place on the horizon where the sun rises.
right. So, for example, the lines points out the horizons, and also the figures are the constellations.
It's a fascinating idea. Maria Reiche believed the ancient Nazca built the lines to be a huge star chart, a map of the skies. The figures were constellations. The lines, pointing to the rising and setting of stars, allowed them to mark the seasons. If it's true, it would make the people of Nazca some of the greatest astronomers of the ancient world. But it turns out the astronomy theory leaves a lot unexplained.
What Anna Maria said is really interesting. There's just one problem, and that astronomical alignment can only account for 30% of the Nazca lines.
And if you draw any line on the desert, it's going to stand about a 30% chance of pointing at something on the horizon. The constellation idea is just as random. If you look at the night sky, you can make out just about any shape or figure you want. All in all, the astronomy theory by itself does not seem to get us very far. But it turns out that theory is largely discredited. There's got to be another explanation. Ancient Peruvians usually buried their dead in a sitting position. For years after they died, they would receive the offerings of the living. As centuries passed, they might be forgotten. But the desert is so dry, the mummies survived in almost their original state.
They seem to be not, most of them are not artificial mummification, but they are rather a natural process. They only got the guts out of them. And then because of the dry conditions and the heat, they mummify naturally.
The Nazca burial ground is amazing. It also really impresses on me just how arid this desert is. That's why it struck me as strange that the lines included so many ocean animals. A whale, a fish, a frigate bird. I wonder if the sea might hold some clues to the mystery of the lines. When I get to the ocean, I discover one of the most dramatic coastlines I've ever seen. The seas of this remote coast are some of the richest in the world. I've heard that local fishermen still use techniques similar to those of the ancient Nazca.
Deborah? I found you.
Deborah is waiting for me at the beach. As we pull in the net, I wonder if it was from experiences like this that the Nazca drew their figures on the desert. This coastline is still populated by the sea creatures of the lines. Could it be they simply drew the animals they saw around them? But in that case, why a monkey? The nearest monkeys are on the other side of the Andes Mountains, in the Amazon jungle. There are no easy answers here, but there is another theory involving water. Not the sea, but water to irrigate their fields. In this desert, it's got to be the most precious commodity. So I've been following a hunch that the lines might have a much more practical explanation. Something to do with water. The Nazca lived in one of the driest places in the world. Their greatest concern must have been water. When I ask Nazca specialist Ana Maria Cogorno about this, she tells me that there's a theory which relates the lines directly to water. It turns out that beneath the desert are a number of aquifers, or underground water flows. The water theory says that the lines point not to the stars, but to these subterranean water sources. Ana Maria says she's got something to show me. Aqueducts. She tells me that Nazca built aqueducts which tapped into those aquifers. This is something I've got to explore.
So they made these. These are 2,000 years old.
It's unbelievable. They still use them.
Where does this water come from?
Comes from the water table.
So this is groundwater.
Yeah, groundwater.
And without this water, they couldn't live here.
Absolutely. The first thing was to observe the water and control the water system.
Water is a precious commodity in this parched landscape. The few rivers generate oases of green vegetation, but for much of the year are dry. The aquifers, filled with water from the mountains, never dry up. According to the water theory, the lines marked these underground water sources. Aqueducts were one way the Nazca could tap into them.
And I gotta say, I am amazed. I had no idea that aqueducts existed in South America, and certainly not 2,000 years ago. The technology, just the ability for these people to engineer such an incredible channel of water and protect it. I have tremendous new respect for the Nazca. I'm definitely impressed. And I definitely need a shower.
So could the Nazca lines be pointing to subterranean sources of water? I discovered that geologists have plotted the lines against the underground geological faults and aquifers of Nazca.
It's true that a lot of the lines point to sources of water, either in the mountains or under the ground. But, like the star theory, there's a problem. Only 30% of the lines correlate to water.
And as we all know, the 30% correlation is close to meaningless. I'm no closer to a convincing theory about the meaning of the lines. It's time to widen my investigation. The problem with Nazca is that all the theories are pure conjecture. We know how they made them, but we don't know why. But there are other great geoglyphs in the Americas about which we know a lot more. So I'm heading to Southern California, where ancient North Americans living along the Colorado River also made geoglyphs. They've been given the Italian name intaglios, engravings. I'm hoping that the geoglyphs here in the lower Mojave Desert can give me some insights into the meaning of the Nazca lines. And once again, the best way to see these things is from the air. The intaglios are in the foothills on the far side. As we fly over the mountains, I'm struck by how similar the parched, barren landscape of the Mojave is to the Nazca Plains. Finally, I see the intaglios beneath us. They're much smaller than the Nazca lines, and sometimes hard to make out. The first one I see seems to be a human figure, gesturing. Others are not far away. There's another human figure. Close to it is an animal, though which one it's hard to say. They're really intriguing. What really distinguishes the intaglios from the Nazca lines is that the direct descendants of the people who made them still live in these lands. So the first person I want to talk to is Lori Kachora, an archaeologist and an elder of the Quetzan people. What Lori tells me about the intaglios is a real revelation. Their meaning has nothing to do with astronomy or water and everything to do with religion. They are figures from the great creation myths of his people. He says that they were also the sites for vision quests and important ceremonies. Could this have been the purpose behind the Nazca lines too? It might explain why the people of Nazca spent so much time and energy creating them. Perhaps, like the intaglios, the figures were the gods of Nazca creation. Could it be that Nazca were turning the desert into a sacred landscape, a great ritual arena where they could perform their ceremonies? Time to head back to Peru and follow this new line of inquiry. When I get to Lima, the first place I visit is the Archaeology Museum.
Are ceremonial urns.
What are these figures?
You can see trophy heads.
Trophy heads.
Yes, yes, you can see here and here. You can see the hand with the head, and the neck is cut.
Yeah, that's a trophy head.
Yeah.
The mystery of the Nazca deepens. Who were they? I've been asking questions about them as astronomers, engineers, and farmers. Suddenly, I discovered they were headhunters too. I knew that the Inca, who dominated this area 500 years after the Nazca, decapitated their enemies and took their heads as trophies, even using them as drinking vessels. Now I discovered the Nazca did something similar. In another room of the museum, Elsa shows me the gruesome evidence.
So this is a trophy mummy.
Yes.
What was the use of them?
Probably ceremonial. They call it trophy heads, but we are not sure that it was a war around it.
Wow.
Elsa tells me that most of the trophy heads are Nazca people. So perhaps they're evidence not of conquest and warfare, but ceremonial violence, some sort of human sacrifice. I've heard news of an excavation which is unearthing more signs of ceremonial life. Cahuachi is a site on the edge of the Pampa, just a mile or two from where the lines are drawn. Located by a water source on the edge of the desert, Cahuachi was huge. It was the greatest Nazca pilgrimage center. 40 pyramids still lie unexcavated beneath the sand. It's also the place to which many of the lines out in the desert lead. Evidence from Kawachi and from comparisons with the ways living Andean peoples perform their rituals have convinced most archaeologists about the ritual significance of the lines and figures. Most archaeologists now believe the lines were sacred pathways on which the Nazca performed their great ceremonies. The figures represented creator spirits, the gods controlling the forces of nature. The Nazca turned their desert into a vast altar to the gods of creation.
And everybody thinks now that most of the lines were made to be walked upon. In special ceremonies, rituals, and dancing, and maybe singing, playing musical instruments as a way of calling the gods.
The Nazca made their geoglyphs so big because they wanted the gods to look down on them and see they were remembered. When the Nazca danced on the lines and figures, they were making an offering to those mythic beings on which every aspect of their lives depended. Did those offerings include human sacrifice? Reuben tells me there's no evidence of violent rituals on the lines. But he knows there's still a lot about the Nazca to be discovered. Who knows what theories about the mysterious lines of Nazca will emerge in the future?